A very good morning to all of you. We are here with a very specific purpose. The purpose is to discuss the Public Administration Mains 2025 Paper 1. Okay. So, we are actually dividing this discussion into two parts. First, we will be taking up today the discussion on Paper 1, and then in the upcoming week, we are also going to schedule a discussion on public administration paper 2 as well. Okay. See, when you're writing your mains examination, or specifically when you are preparing for this, so the questions that are asked in the UPSC examinations, these questions are the most important of, these are the most important questions. And all of you all of you need to do what? All of you need to take this as, take this as a specific, no you need to refer to this as a parameter to judge how well you are prepared. Okay. And in our discussion, specifically when it comes to public administration paper, you will find that, like every year, there are some questions which are very straightforward, and just no just a bit of the knowledge that we have, that knowledge in itself would suffice. Okay. But some questions that are there, they are very general, no general of nature. That means there is not very, no you can say there is not a need of a lot of knowledge of public administration to answer those questions. So what we do is, we specifically, no in today's discussion you will see this, that we are going to not only answer those questions, but we are also going to ensure that how we integrate public administration as a part of it. That means the knowledge that we have gained in public administration, the ideas that we have gone through there, how to integrate that as a part of your answer writing. That is also something which is very, no, it is something that you have to learn as a part of your answer writing skills. Okay. So this is what we are going to do here. Okay. So without any delay, let's begin. Let's begin with the very first question. See, as you know, question number 1 and question number 5, these are compulsory questions, and what you have to do is you have to answer them, and these are 10 markers. So you have 5 questions each, and all these questions are 10 markers. So you have 150 words. You have 150 words to basically address them. Okay. So you can see imperfect. Let's begin that. First question is, imperfect market and political factors limit the application of public choice approach. Explain. Okay. So specifically for all of you who have, who have gone through public administration classes, we know what public choice approach is about. Okay. So public choice approach propagates what ideas? Public choice approach propagates the ideas of institutional pluralism. It considers that all human beings are, individual utility maximizers. Individual utility, individual utility maximizers. Clear? It also proposes that every individual is capable of making economically rational decisions. Every individual economically rational decisions. Okay. We know this much. And now, if we look at the question, what does the question say? The question says imperfect market and political factors limit the application of public choice approach. Okay. So what would be the introduction part of this particular question? Introduction part of this particular question is the very, no, you can start by introducing what is public choice approach. That is basically your introduction. Okay. And no, why is that necessary? Why don't we directly get into the question? Because you have to ensure that you convey to the examiner that you know what are the basic ideas that are related to it. Okay. So what you do is you start by introducing what public choice approach is, and then get to the body part. And in the body part of your answer, you will explain what two factors. First of all, you have to explain imperfection of the market. Okay. So imperfection of the market. Imperfection of market. You have to explain the fact that market, there is a problem with how the market functions, because there is elitism. When we implement the public choice approach, there are some negative consequences of it, like elitism. Okay. It results into development of user pay relationship. User pay relationship. Okay. And because it is only a 10 marker, so I cannot go beyond this. I cannot write all the criticisms that we have discussed. We will only write a few of them. We will specifically focus on how market, there is a problem with the market because market in itself propagates elitism. Implementation of it results into a user pay relationship. Not necessarily it is going to always ensure that decisions are taken in public interest. Okay, you have to mention this part. And then you also have to mention, if you look at the second part here, it says political factors. So imperfect market, you have explained that political factors. Now when we talk about political factors, what kind of political factors are we referring to? See, when we talk about the functioning of the market, even functioning of the market, it does not adequately work because political factors, that means there is politicization of how the market is to function, because ultimately the decision making lies with whom? Ultimately the decision making lies with those who are a part of the political process. So here what happens is the political factors, they do not allow they do not allow the market to function ideally, you can say that. In fact, you can even use Riggs's concept, and you can add the bazaar canteen model. है ना? If you remember, Riggs has given this concept of bazaar canteen. So you can use Riggs's idea of bazaar canteen to explain. You can use the concept of bazaar canteen to explain this, because what is Riggs's idea of bazaar canteen? So Riggs is a thinker who has specifically pointed out that in a prismatic society, market does not function on the basis of demand and supply. Why? Because there are populist decision making that is done by, obviously, those who are in political power. So you can just refer to that and therefore write that these political factors that are there, it inhibits the market to function ideally. And this is where the problem related to the public choice approach lies. Okay. And then you can conclude your answer. Your conclusion could be some suggestions. It could be certain suggestions, or you can mention that how, with the upcoming of the public management approach, with the coming up of the public management approach that is there, how that public management approach has operationalized to a certain extent the working of the public choice approach. Clear? This is basically what you can address. देखो, a concrete answer. There is so much to write that you don't have room to no you don't have room to generalize your answer. And when the examiner reads this, when the examiner reads that you have the capability to conceptualize here Riggs's idea of bazaar canteen and refer to it as a problem as to how politics does not allow the market to function adequately, that is something which will leave a very good impression on the examiner. Okay, I have always mentioned, for most of you who have attended the classes, I've always mentioned that there is a lot of importance for conceptual clarity, because that will allow you to use those concepts anywhere. Okay, moving on. The second question: the fine art of decision making is not making decisions that others can make. Now, if you look at this particular question is about ensuring ensuring that the whole concept that is there, of decision making, it is done at the adequate level, which means decisions should be taken at a specific level. Decisions should be taken at a specific level. Okay. Sorry, sir, to interpret you in the middle. I have enrolled in your 2026 program. So, is it recommended for me? Yes, of course, Satvik. See, you would be able to, no, most obviously, because you are absolutely new. So, most of these things that are there, you would not be able to understand per se. But the way I am trying to interpret the questions, what is the nature of questions, at least you will understand that part. Okay, so that becomes important for you. Okay, so fine art of decisions should be taken at the adequate level. There should neither be over centralization of decision making, there should not be over centralization of decision making. Okay, neither should there be, neither there should be what, neither there should be over delegation of decision making. Over delegation, if you remember, for those who have already completed the discussion, MP Follett, if we come to MP Follett, and what was MP Follett's view related to delegation? MP Follett considered that delegation of authority is, it is something which actually does not happen. Why? Because according to her, those who are responsible for implementing a particular decision, they are also responsible for taking that decision. So assuming that decisions can be taken, no, assuming that decisions can be taken by a particular authority who himself does not involve in the decision making process is incorrect. Anyways, how to answer this particular question? See, as you know, decision making is a concept given by Herbert Simon. Herbert Simon believes that decision making is at the heart of administration, because no, for those who have studied Simon's theory, you know, that this Simon was of the opinion that every individual in the organization takes decisions, and every act and behavior of an individual in the organization involves decision making. So, unlike the classical organization theories, Simon has defined decision making, or you can say Simon has defined organization in terms of decision making. Okay, so Simon is a very, very important theorist related to decision making. Now, when it comes to uh, no, when it comes to this question, the question deals with two things: delegation and centralization of the decision making concept. So we have to understand that what decisions can be delegated and what decisions can no what decisions need to be centralized. So if you are in an organization, when you are taking a decision, you have to also, before taking a decision, also see to this whole idea that are you the most competent authority to take that decisions, or is there a possibility in the that there is someone else in the organization who is better positioned to take the decision that is at the no at concern here? That is what the question demands. Okay, so you have to write about what you have to write about: routine decisions. You have to write about routine decisions versus strategic decisions. Remember, programmed versus unprogrammed decision. Okay, programmed versus non-programmed decisions. Non-programmed decisions, this is what Simon has to say. And again, routine decisions can be taken by those who are even at the lower level in the hierarchy, because they can take decisions and they are better in a position to do what? They are better in a position to understand what decisions can be taken and what is the best way to take those decisions. Okay. But when it comes to strategic decisions are to be taken at a particular level, because that level decides what should be the goals of the organization and what should be the better process through which those goals are to be implemented. As Taylor said, there was no Taylor had it no specifically talked about separation between planning and execution. So that aspect is routine versus strategic decision. The principle of delegation, as we have already seen here, delegation of decision making is a very important management principle that is followed. Yes, there are scholars like MP Follett who consider delegation to be a myth for some reason, but delegation of authority needs to be done. Though the classical thinkers do not believe in that, they believe in concentration of decision making. But we know, as per the more recent traditions, that it is basically the decision making has to be delegated as well. Okay, span of control. That means when it comes to what no when it comes to the superior can supervise effectively only a limited number of individuals. Beyond that, he has to do what? He has to delegate. Okay. Now, what is its implications? If decisions are taken at the right level, it would result into efficiency. It would result into more empowerment also, because it is related to the concept of decentralization. It would also result into better leadership or strategic leadership. And there is an ethical responsibility also, like when it comes to using force cannot be it is not something which can be adopted, uh, you can say, naturally. The reason is that coercive power is against the dignity of humans. So there is also an ethical responsibility to delegate decision making powers. Okay, moving on. Has the media nixed its role in holding the government accountable and ensuring transparency? A very simple question. Now, in this question, we have to mention two things. First of all, we have to mention why. Why have we seen in recent times that media and its role to hold the government, the executive, accountable? Why? What are the reasons why there has been a compromise on it? And what are the reasons? The reason is that there is commercial pressure today. The focus is on TRP, ratings, viewership. So accountability of the government is not that. No, it's commercially not viable. It's commercially not viable. Second, political alignments. You must have heard about the term the Godi media, but don't use that term. But you will find that this is very much a reality as of today. So you will find that there are media houses which are for the government, there are media houses which are against the government. Those media houses which are for the government, they will never criticize the government, and those who are against the government will always criticize the government. Both of these are because of political alignments, not good. Third, technological disruptions have been there. Technological disruptions, why? Because the digital platform monopoly has been disrupted. Today, we live in an era of social media. So, in the era of social media, disruptions that has there, disruptions, this disruption has done what? This has further compromised the effectiveness of the media. Why? Because now media has to worry about even those disruptions. Okay. And finally, pressure on public service media. That means what? The public service media, they are the ones who are often champion transparency, as well as editorial autonomy deficiency and such practices that are there in the democratic society. And we do see that there are pressure that is created on them. There are some other reasons also. You will find that there has been also certain recently there was a case where one of the media houses, the individual heading the media house was basically arrested also. The reason for his arrest was that he was getting funding from some external sources. So these factors are also there. So some of the reasons, because it's a 10 marker, I cannot go beyond that. So these are the reasons why there has been a disruption. But we cannot just, no, we cannot just end our answer by simply writing only this. We also have to balance our answer by writing the positive outcomes as of today. So today what you see, alternative, persistent and evolving accountability. How? First point, alternative and digital media platforms. So even though traditional media seems to be compromised, but because there is emergence of and decentralization of information, that has resulted into emergence of digital platforms, alternative digital platforms. Okay. Secondly, media has collaborated with the civil society and therefore has ensured better accountability of the government. Third, regulatory and institutional reforms. Now, this is something which is an ongoing process. The government is trying to bring about reforms there. So that will also further do what? It would further ensure better performance of the media. That is also there. So balance your answer. Okay. Next. Is Herbert Simon justified in criticizing some principles of administration as proverbs? Okay. Now, this is a very easy question. Is Herbert Simon justified? Now, we know that Simon is one of the most important critiques of the principles, and Simon calls these principles as proverbs, slogans, myth, natural fallacies, pompous inanities. These are the terms that Simon uses for criticizing the principles. Okay. So the introduction part would be the criticism of Simon, no, the criticism that Simon has taken up. The body part, the first part of your body, or the body part could be what? Simply writing why is Simon justified. So why does Simon criticize the principles? Simon criticizes the principles on the ground that these are based on assumption of human behavior. Assumption of human behavior and not the actual human behavior. It is not based on actual human behavior. It is based on assumption of human behavior. Like, you can give examples related to motivation and how The classical theory believes in what? Believes only in economic motivation. So this is the best example to prove that how, according to the classical approach, including the principles of administration, they make a major mistake. Why? Because they consider that humans, no, they assume a certain specific kind of human behavior, which they assume that this will be universally true. That is wrong. Okay. So you will write that you can give other examples also to substantiate his criticisms. How Simon considered that when it comes to the principles that are there, principles occur in pairs. They occur in pairs. Like there are some what? There are some inherent contradiction between certain principles. Like one of the criticisms is related to spirit decorps. Spirit decorps versus hierarchy, or spirit decorps versus discipline, something like that. Then there is authority versus initiative. How there is a contradiction there. You can write this as a part of your body. And then in conclusion, you can defend the principles. You can defend the principles because the question says how far is Simon justified. So in that case, body part, you can write yes, Simon is justified because of the valid reasons that he has given. But then you can even defend these principles. How they, how these principles contributed to the to not exactly the science, but making public administration more scientific by nature, not achieving science of administration, but initiating this whole idea of administration possibly being a science. Similarly, how their focus was on efficiency, you can write about that and accordingly defend the principles in the conclusion part. Okay. Then comes administrative law has evolved from the need to create a system of public administration under law. Elucidate. Actually, this is a question where you simply have to write the importance of administrative law and the definition of administrative law. Because what is administrative law? Administrative law is about ensuring that administration which has no administration which today is a very important phenomena, works in accordance to the law. That means it does not have unlimited powers, and there are limits that are imposed. There are limits that are imposed to the working of, limits are imposed to the working of administration. That is basically the, no, that is basically what administrative law is. Okay. Administrative, no, it is that branch of the law which has to deal with administration, and it defines the power, duties, as well as the limitations of administration. That is what administrative law is. So you will have to write what? You will have to write in the introduction part itself, where you will mention what is administrative law, and you will also mention that how, with the growth of the welfare state concept, how this, with the growth of the welfare state concept, administrative law is today, it's a branch of law which has become more important, because with the growth of welfare state, the powers of administration has increased, and that is where the limitation on such powers, has also become more important. Okay. Then you will correlate the idea, core objectives, you will correlate that idea. How will you correlate that idea? You will, no, you will write about how it regulates the power, procedures, and organization of administrative agencies, the part that I have already discussed. Its relationship, reason for growth, why is administrative law becoming more and more important? You will write about that, and then you will write a conclusion. A very simple question. It is about definition and writing today how administrative law has, how administrative law has today grown in importance and what is the reason for it. That is dependent, growth of welfare state, etc., etc. Okay, because it's a 10 marker, so there is no need to go beyond that. Next, question number 2A. Now, out of the remaining questions, question number 1, question number 5, they are compulsory. Out of the remaining questions, that is question number 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, that is out of the remaining 6 questions that you have, you are supposed to, no, you are supposed to write 3 of them. Okay, you are supposed to write 3 of them. These, so you have a choice, but still for us, we will be discussing all the questions. Okay. New public management has actually been a transitional state in evolution from traditional public administration to what, to what is here called new public governance. Explain. Very, very easy. Why am I saying very, very easy? Because see, look at how has this evolution gone. First, we see the emergence of traditional public administration. Okay, this traditional public administration, you can say till the 1960s. From the 1960s, we see the evolution of a concept of what? Public management. So next comes public management. Public management. Public management, it emerges in 2 phases. Phase 1, where we call it as Thatcherism and Reaganism. Thatcherism and Reaganism, where focus is only on privatization. Okay. Then comes the phase 2 part, which is the NPM part, new public management part, which primarily grows in the 1990s with the OECD group, OSET group, and scholars like, Christopher Hood and Walter Kikart, and how they contribute to the emergence of new public management. And then in the 21st century, we see the emergence of new public governance part. Okay, new public governance part or new public service approach. These are the factors that emerges, it comes as a part of the 21st century. And how this particular, new public service and new public governance part, new public services approach, what do? They are even critical of NPM. You can also write some basic ideas about what they are. What is the basic concept there? You can write that as well. However, you cannot end the question here, because we cannot agree to this idea that it is just a traditional, it's just a transitional, it's just a transitory kind of a phenomena. We cannot agree to this. So in the conclusion part, you have to address how NPM and the contributions of NPM resulted into major changes and a development of a sub-discipline, which later on, even when we talk about, even when we talk about NPG or NPS, these are factors which emerges, these are the factors which emerges as or at least some theoretical base of these. No, this is basically in the concept of NPM. So you have to mention that and accordingly address this very question. Okay, very easy. Next, MP Follett pioneered the evolution of socio-psychological approach to the study of organizations explained. Okay, again a very simple and a very easy concept. MP Follett. Now, MP Follett is a is a scholar who is considered that MP Follett was someone who, though belonged to the classical era, but the contributions made by MP Follett were more neoclassical in their, were more neoclassical, more like human relations approach and the behavioral idea. So you can start the answer by writing how there is a statement related to MP Follett, how she was way ahead, way ahead of her times. You can start your answer by quoting this particular statement. This is a statement that has been given by Urvik, and accordingly you can start your answer. You can start by mentioning in the introduction itself how she belonged to the classical era. So she is contemporary to scholars like Taylor or Fayol. She is contemporary to these scholars. But then, why is she a pioneer? Because her ideas related to, whether it is, you can give examples, you can write about how she disagreed with the classical ideas, she disagreed with the classical concept, she disagreed with the classical concept or the classical theories. How? You can give some examples. You can write about what is her view on authority, where classical approach believes in coercive authority. No, she does not believe in that form of authority. Okay, she in fact considers that classical authority, that is their classical way to looking at authority, does not necessarily, no, it is not necessarily her idea. How she believes in coactive power, how she, no, does she completely is a critique to the coercive concept, and she believes in power with, not power over. These ideas you can mention. You can talk about her idea of leadership, how, where classical theories believed in positional leadership, neoclassical thinkers believed in what? No, not positional leadership. Rather, no, they were more of, no, they were more related to how, interrelationships, leadership, which is an employee oriented leader, and that is what even she believed in. In fact, she went one step ahead and she talked about situational leadership. So you can mention that aspect. है ना? You can mention that. You can talk about how she was very much no an advocate of interrelationships. That how interrelationships, and which gave birth to the ideas like informal groups and informal organizations, how that is there. You can give these examples in the body part to substantiate this. Okay, and in the conclusion part of your answer, you can come up with some criticisms as to how her ideas that are there, they were, no, it is considered that there are statements like her idealism is showing, her idealism is showing. You can even write about her constructive conflict, constructive conflict idea and how it seems to be managerially not feasible. Managerially not feasible. It is not managerially feasible. And you can end your answer. Okay. See this. Under new public management framework, public-private partnership challenges entropy of closed and open models of the organization. Analyze. Where have we read about this concept of entropy? Where have we read about this concept of entropy? Anyone? If you look at this very question, this is not a simple question because this question tries to integrate not one but multiple topics. Like it talks about new public management framework. It talks about public-private partnership, the PPP concept, and it also talks about entropy of closed and open models. Where have we read about entropy? Anyone? We have read about this concept of entropy while we were discussing the systems theory. The systems theory. And is entropy good or bad for an organization? Is entropy good or bad for an organization? Entropy means disintegration. Entropy means what? It means disintegration. Entropy means disintegration. That means it is not something which is good for any organization because there is a statement that has been given. The statement says an organization has a natural tendency towards entropy. This is the question that is being asked. The question is that if you look at the closed model of an organization or the open model of an organization, both closed model and open model have a tendency to achieve or to disintegrate. And the question says that PPP model within the NPM framework has actually arrested this concept. That means the PPP model that is there, it does not allow the organization to disintegrate. So it has plays a positive, the PPP model has played a positive role. That is how you have to explain. This is the question that you have to explain here. Okay, this is the demand. So how would you write this? See, the question is why, when it comes to why does an organization, closed or open, why does that organization move towards entropy? See, a closed model that is there, that is Weberian bureaucratic organization or the classical theory, does not take into consideration its environment. It does not take into consideration its environment. And because it does not take into consideration its environment, so they do not change based on the need and adaptability to its environment. And when you don't change on the basis of how the environment is changing, how there has been, how there is a kind of a no need for adaptability within the organization, if you don't change accordingly, what is the consequence of it? The consequence of it is that there will be disintegration. Okay, so closed model is vulnerable to no disintegration because it does not have the capability to adapt. On the other hand, when we talk about open model, when we talk about open model of an organization, what happens now? Open model of an organization, specifically if we look at this, suppose this, what has happened is that open model of an organization is very flexible. It interacts with its environment and it is learning oriented, but there are multiple stakeholders. there are multiple stakeholders that emerges. So what happens is, if there are multiple stakeholders, there can always be coordination failure. There can always be coordination related failures. There can be accountability gap. Why? Because there are multiple stakeholders. So there are multiple players. So very likely the organization is working along with, the bureaucratic system is working along with maybe no, the private sector, maybe other organizations. So there may be issues related to coordination. There may be issues related to accountability. There may be issues like contractual disputes between the stakeholders. Now this is something which could do what? This is something which could result into, again, the problem related to entropy or disintegration. So what does PPP model do here? The public-private partnership model, because it emphasizes on the need to cooperate between them, and it designates every stakeholder what its role is and how they are going to perform their role. When there is a clear demarcation of their role, there is a clear demarcation of authority, responsibility, etc. So the problems related to who is accountable for what, the problem related to coordination, the problem related to contractual disputes to a large extent is resolved. And that is the reason why PPP model can act as an antidote. You have to explain this part in your body. Okay. This is the question. So you have to, those who have already completed this NPM, this concept that is there, please answer this question. This is a very, very technical but very important question. It just needs you to be able to correlate things. Systems approach with that of NPM, with that of PPP. If you are able to correlate these three ideas, your work is done. Okay. Moving on. In conflict situation in the organization, leadership migrates to the aggressive and relegates the emotional maturity to the background. Discuss. Now this question that you see, now this question is something which is a very general kind of a question. Yes, it's a question on leadership. Yes, leadership is very much a part of our no of our syllabus, but here there is no such references as to which leadership theory should I refer to while I'm writing this. No, these references are not given in the question per se. So your objective in these kinds of question is to do what? First of all, explain what the question demands, and secondly, along with explaining what the question demands, you also have to integrate the knowledge of public administration here. Okay, and how can you do it? So the first part of this question would be related to doing what? The first part of this question would be related to addressing what exactly the statement says. So the first part of the question is, we would be able to see that what happens. So during a conflict like situation that is there, that emerges in an organization, a leader who otherwise is more of a participative leader, is more of an employee oriented leader, but because of the conflict situation, what happens is that they the decision making that is there, the very likely short term orientation comes up, and all of this does what? All of this, no, even there is a there is a need for a swift action. All of this does what? All of this may result into a aggressive strategy of leadership, which seems to be what? It seems to be more rewarding. In this kind of a situation, in a conflict like situation, an aggressive form of leadership could be considered as more rewarding. Now, what is the consequence of following this aggressive kind of leadership? You can see emotional maturity of the individual, who generally is empathic and has empathy, etc. But during this kind of a leadership, during this kind of a conflict situation, they are not able to take those factors into consideration. Okay, so they do what? They sideline this. So this may result into more conflict. This may result into loss of trust. This may result into employee withdrawal. If you remember, we have talked about how the informal group reacts, how the informal organization reacts if not nurtured, if they are no if these organizations are not properly nurtured, if the informal organization is not properly nurtured, so there may be a issue. The informal organization starts acting in contradiction to the goals of the formal organization. We know about that. So leadership plays a very important role. Leadership plays a very important role. In fact, Bernard was an individual who specifically pointed out that one of the important things that executive needs to do is that executive needs to create a cooperative social system. And how can that be created? When the both the formal and informal organization works together. So if this situation occurs and the leader loses his emotional maturity, there may be some problems that may emerge because of that. Okay. Now the question is how to handle that. So in that case, you will be writing about what? Transformational leadership. You will be writing about transformational leadership and how transformational leadership takes that into consideration. If no, you would be writing about how the transformational leadership considers emotional intelligence and maturity to be very important. You can give examples of transformational leadership, like APJ Abdul Kalam always talks about, had always talked about, APJ Abdul Kalam had always talked about the role of transformational leadership. Even when it came to addressing whether it was project leaders that he worked under, even his teachers, and how this kind of leadership shaped the individual's achievement. You can mention that part as well. Okay. Transformational leadership becomes very important here. Remember, we know that this question is not directly related to no very likely public administration. So we need to add our a knowledge of public administration so that we make it more public administration oriented. So we would write about transformational leadership. We would write about what? The role of situation, because there is situational leadership theory as well. Situational leadership theory. And in situational leadership theory, you can mention, in situational leadership theory, you can mention some ideas. Like in situational leadership theory that is there, you can, no, you can talk about one of the thinkers like Fiedler and his contingency model. So Fiedler has talked about how situation impacts leadership, how situation impacts leadership. You can mention that aspect. Okay, that is how you are going to address this. Okay, so this is basically how you address this very question, by introducing some things which are a part of our syllabus, not directly related, but you have to introduce things. If you just write a simple question, because this answer is not difficult, we know that the natural tendency, even if you look at, no even if you look at uh, a very important scholar in this regard was MP Follett. MP Follett, when she was talking about conflict resolution, She had actually mentioned integration as a strategy. And while she was mentioning integration as a strategy, while she was mentioning integration as a strategy, she had specifically mentioned what are the problems of integration. And she said that people are trained in dominance. People are what? People are trained, trained in, people are trained in dominance. People are trained in dominance. She mentioned that. You can see the example, how the question shapes that. You can refer to even MP Follett here. And then you can address this question. Okay? क्वेश्चन पूछना है कि अभी see, Pooja, if your question is for me, if you have if you are going to attempt in 2029, we are still in 2025, so you have 4 years. If you prepare for basic no, general studies, it will help you in all government examination, including civil services. Okay, that is what I can say. But you have to have a strategy as to how you are going to approach that. Okay, moving on. Hmm. Another very important question is about the foundations of public administration, new public management, and public governance rests on rule of law. Discuss. Rests on rule of law. Discuss. This is basically the question. So the question is, the question is so interesting that it is trying to, it is trying to ask you things which seem to be unrelated. Because when we talk about things like NPM, or for that matter public governance, NPM and public governance approach, they specifically advocate that the interference of the government and government institutions like the bureaucracy, etc., this should decrease. They should decrease. And in this case, it says rule of law. So it, on the face of it, seems to be contrary to each other, but it is not. How? See, the when we talk about rule of law, what does rule of law talk about? And even if we correlate it to NPM or public governance, it talks about fairness. Even rule of law talks about fairness. Rule of law talks about accountability. Rule of law talks about equality. Rule of law talks about no exercise of arbitrary powers. Similarly, if we if we look at NPM, NPM also talks about accountability. One of the basic principles on which it is based is accountability. One of the basic principles of NPM or public governance, it also is about what? There should be no arbitrary exercise of powers. There should be no, the government should not exercise its power arbitrarily. There should be fairness related to competition, etc. That is there. So, on the face of it, it may seem in contradiction to each other, but the demand remains the same. And you have to mention that how, when it comes to, no, when it comes to NPM, when it comes to rule of law, what does it facilitate? It facilitates efficiency. It facilitates effectiveness. NPM talks about market oriented management, which would result into what? Which will result into those, some emergence of certain techniques, which is again based on the basic principle of rule of law, like whether it is about adoption of competition or performance measurement. It also talks about what? It also talks about having legal standards. It also talks about ensuring that there are legal protections. That means on the face of it, where we see that NPM, public governance, these concepts that are there, it may seem to be in contradiction to each other, because it advocates less interference from the government, but existence of rule of law does not mean more interference of the government. It is not in contradiction to each other. It is not in contradiction to each other. Clear? So you have to understand the basic principle. That's it. And then you can, obviously, this would be your body part. And in the introduction part, what you can do is, in the introduction part, you can always talk about, what is the basic ideas related to NPM, rule of law, public governance. In the body part, you can see the correlation that we just talked about. You can mention that, and accordingly you can write a conclusion where you can emphasize on the dissimilarities, where you can mention that how NPM or new public governance approach, they no they what they advocate is that they advocate less interference of government, but they do not contradict the phenomena of governance, which means they do not contradict rule of law or efficiency for that matter. You have to write that as a part of conclusion. Okay. The principle of checks and balances counts among the most fundamental constitutional values. Comment. A very simple question. You have to mention, first of all, you have to mention in the introduction part itself, you will mention separation of powers, and along with separation of powers, you will mention the how separation of powers, there is a supplementary principle of checks and balances related to it. Then in the body part, you will mention why is it fundamental. So you will mention how checks and balances ensures that there is no arbitrary exercise of powers. Checks and balances ensure there is existence of limited government. Checks and balances ensures that the rights of citizens are also protected. And then you can even mention the Lord Acton's statement: absolute power corrupts and power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Hence, the requirement of checks and balances. You can mention that. This is basically your answer. Okay. Moving on. Delegated legislation should be clear and should confine to its limits determined by the legislature. In light of this statement, explain how misuse of administrative discretion can be checked. Misuse of administrative discretion can be checked. Now, how will you start this question? The introduction of this question would be about what? Would be about the concept of presenting the concept of new despotism. For those who have, for whom I have discussed the topic administrative law, I have used this term new despotism. And what does this new despotism mean? The term new despotism basically refers to how even in the modern governance phenomena, where there has been emergence of, democracy, and there has been talk about balance of power, separation of power, checks and balances. Despite all of that, because the nature of administration has been changing, the nature of governance has been changing, this has given a lot of naturally there has been a lot of concentration of powers within the executive. And the phenomena, like two specific phenomena, most importantly delegated legislation and the phenomena of administrative tribunals, how these two phenomena have actually contributed to the emergence of new despotism. That is your introduction. Okay. Then it is about the body part of your answer will include two things. First, the problems of concentration of powers, and then you will write the checks, because that is what is being asked. So you would write what happens if there is a problem. That means if there is a lot of concentration of powers with administration, so what is going to happen? It is very likely going to encroach upon the liberty of people. It is very likely going to violate separation of powers. So that problem part you will mention here. Violation of separation of powers. Violation of separation of powers. You may write, you may mention how it also contradicts rule of law, because administration would now be above the law. You'll mention that part. You will also mention how liberty can be encroached upon, can be encroached. So you'd mention the problems part. Then you will mention the checks. So what are the checks? You will write about the parliamentary committees, parliamentary debates, debates and discussions. You will mention how the higher judiciary acts as a check on tribunals. You'd mention all of this. So problems and checks, both of these parts would be written here. Okay. And then you will conclude. And the conclusion would be, why is delegated legislation important? Delegated legislation is, no, it is a natural outgrowth of, it's a natural outgrowth of emergence of welfare state. You'll write that as a part of your conclusion. Natural outgrowth of emergence of welfare state. That would be your conclusion. Okay. Easy question, not that difficult. Second, leadership is not about taking credit for success, but it is also about owning up and being accountable for failures. Elucidate. Again, a question on leadership. And again, the question on leadership is not a question which directly talks about any specific kind of, any specific kind of leadership theory. Generally, in public administration, when you get a question on leadership, you get a question on leadership theories. But again, this time also, this is the second question, and the second question on leadership also does not give that. So you can write about what? Building trust. How leaders, if they are accountable, how it builds trust and credibility. You can write about acknowledging failures. You can talk about honesty, transparency. It also fosters, psychological trust that is there among the members of the team. If the leader himself is willing to take responsibility, the leader himself is willing to, no, identify that yes, there can be mistakes that can be made even by the leaders. That part you would be mentioning here. Then you would write about shared ownership, how better leadership is about what? Shared ownership. You can then mention about certain theories, like you can mention about again MP Follett. And MP Follett mentioned situational leadership. MP Follett talked about situational leadership, and this is the reason why she mentions situational leadership, because according to her, classical leadership, or the classical theory that is there, what does the classical theory do? It talks about leaders only giving orders, and it talks about positional leadership, and how she believed that positional leadership or just giving orders, it hampers the dignity. So this kind of leadership does what? This kind of leadership, no, this kind of leadership where there is acknowledgement of problems, sharing of even blame related to failures. What does it do? It in long term brings about integration. If you remember, integration has been talked about by MP Follett, integration has been talked about by Douglas McGregor. You will introduce that aspect here. You will introduce the integration part. You can also talk about Chris Argyris's fusion process, and how through fusion process, if the leader addresses this, how there is a fusion between his individual goals and organizational goals. You can talk about Bernard, and you can mention how Bernard, when Bernard mentions the concept of what? Voluntary contribution. Voluntary contribution as one of the functions of the executive, how that depends upon trust, and this kind of leadership brings about trust. Correlating that idea, this correlation has to be made, because otherwise this is not an answer of public administration. You have to include these theories and the ideas to bring about that correlation. Okay. Bureaucracy constitutes an imaginary state, and it is the spiritualism of the state. Explain. On the face of it, it seems to be a very difficult question if you don't understand the question. Otherwise, it is not that difficult. But what are the two things? Let's first decipher what the question says. And the question talks about two important things. Question first talks about bureaucracy constituting of an imaginary state. Bureaucracy doing what? Constituting of an imaginary state. So, there is one idea related to the imaginary state part, and the second idea is related to the spiritualism part. Okay? Spiritualism of the state. So, how bureaucracy is about first of all, it is about an imaginary state, and second, how bureaucracy is about the spiritualism of the state. We have to explain these two ideas. Okay, let's do that. See, first the imaginary state part. Now, this concept has been, in fact, this particular statement that has been given, it is Weber's statement. It is Weber's statement. So, the concept is about Weber. So, if you look at Weber, how Weber views bureaucracy to be, Weber considers that bureaucracy is an administrative structure, and it is a practical reality through which the modern state what happens through which the modern state operates. So what is bureaucracy? Bureaucracy is an instrument which is present in the modern state, or it is how the modern state operationalizes itself. Okay, that is the part. Now, when it comes to the state as a political entity, it is an abstract legal concept. State has, we generally consider that state has the legal powers. But who exercises that power on behalf of the state? The power is exercised on behalf of the state by the bureaucracy. It is exercised by the bureaucracy. Okay. So, whenever we talk about bureaucracy, bureaucracy is what is the tangible, the functioning of the state. For us, what is the state? For a common man, we see the state, we look at institutions, and we see people who are a part of bureaucracy working as the part of those institutions. For a human being, a normal citizen, the state is bureaucracy. Why? Because bureaucracy is exercising the powers that has been given to the state. Clear? So what is state? It is, now come back to the question. What is the question saying? imaginary state. Imaginary state, why? Because the powers that are being enjoyed are not being enjoyed by the state per se, it is being enjoyed by the bureaucracy on behalf of the state. So for us, state is imaginary. The true power belongs to the bureaucracy. This is what Weber says. That is the reason why Weber says bureaucracy operationalizes legal rational authority. Clear? The second part is about spiritualism. So let us address that, no, that aspect also. Bureaucracy as spiritualism of the state. See, the term spiritualism here means what? The term spiritualism here means that it is a it is a metaphorical indicating that bureaucracy embodies the spirit of the rational essence of the modern state. So what is the modern state? The essence, the spirit of modern state is operationalized by the bureaucracy. So it is the bureaucracy which embodies that. So the spirit, the spiritualism that we are talking about the state, it is actually exercised by the bureaucracy in the form of legal rational authority. There are rules, there are legal rational authority. Clear? So rather than personalities or rather than traditions, which in the form of Weber, it is charismatic authority and traditional authority. Weber does not believe in that. Weber believes in what? Weber believes not in traditional authority. Weber does not believe in charismatic authority. Weber believes in legal rational authority because he believes that in the modern state, this legal rational authority, which that is though that authority which works impersonally, it is rule based, it is hierarchical, this is the true spirit, this is the true spirit of the state, and that is the reason why it is spiritualism. Simple idea, nothing technical about it, just the use of language. So what kind of language you use becomes important here. Okay, moving on. The e-advocacy model of e-governance can facilitate democratization of public policy making. Very simple. Why e-advocacy model? Remember, when we were discussing the different models of e-governance, we have talked about the e-advocacy model, where the you can say the information and communication technology is used by the government to advocate policies or to ensure participation of the people in the in the process of policy making. How? By by coming up with a platform. What does the platform do? The platform allows easy interaction of the people, easy communication by the government to the people about the policies. It also facilitates what does the people want related to those policies. It easily it also advocates presence of a lot of people who are experts in those areas. They provide feedback to the government, and the government, looking at those feedbacks, if they feel it is relevant, could easily make up certain changes in the policies through the e-advocacy model. है ना? Which means the e-advocacy model, which talks about what? Which talks about using information and communication technology, providing for a platform where there is easy communication between the people and the government related to specific policies, allow for better participation of the people in advocating those policies or providing feedback related to those policies. Okay, that is what e-advocacy model is. That is the reason why it is called as e-lobbying model. It is also called as e-mobilization model. Why? Because it even gives people the no the through the use of information and communication technology, they can advocate for a policy or against a policy. They can provide feedback for a policy or against a policy. Okay, what does that do? That basically ensures that there is more democratization of the public policy process. There is what? There is more democratization of the public policy process. Okay? That is what the whole concept is. So this is what e-advocacy model is about. A 10 marker, so there is nothing. No, you have to first of all introduce the question by writing ICT, that is information and communication technology. That is how you are going to start. Then you are going to write about in the body part the e-advocacy model. How does it facilitate? And then in the in the conclusion model, you can correlate the democratization part with the e-advocacy model. In fact, you can even write some kind of positives and negatives there. Okay, that's how you frame this answer. ठीक है, हिंदी में बोलिए उमेश. I see this, the whole objective here is that we are going, no, we are this is being relayed in the English medium batch. So I don't have technical words that are there in Hindi, so I will not be able to do justice, है ना? So if I'm not able to do justice related to what we are discussing in that language, तो वो बोलना सही नहीं होगा. Yes, a very good afternoon, everyone. Test series, we are thinking about it. As soon as as soon as there is anything that is finalized, we are definitely going to no, we are going to definitely provide you with that. Okay, but right now there is no such test series. We are thinking about it. Okay. Next comes neoliberal policies enhanced the scope and opportunity of taxation for the government. Neoliberal policy does what? Neoliberal policy allows participation of the private sector. Neoliberal policy allows for more and more consumption. More and more consumption allows for what? More and more consumption allows for consumption-based taxation. Whenever there is consumption-based taxation, the elasticity of the taxation policy does what? The elasticity of the taxation policy is increased. है ना? देखो, look at direct and indirect taxes. Direct taxes क्या होते हैं? The income that we earn and a tax on it. There is no flexibility there. Elasticity नहीं है. You can, whatever your income is, on the basis of that you will be charged. There cannot be an increase or decrease related to that. Okay. But when it comes to consumption based taxes means there are we are consuming a lot of products, and wherever there is a consumption based tax like GST or VAT, there can always be what? There can always be new products which can which can be taxed, and accordingly there can be more elasticity that the government has. Okay. Neoliberalism is allowing for private sector, and it allows for policies like liberalization. It allows for policies like privatization. So what does, when the private sector is there, private sector goes beyond just basic needs. The private sector comes up with different products which could allow which allows an individual different you can say products to consume. When there are different products that you can consume, you can always do what? You can always tax those products, है ना? So that is the correlation here. So in the introduction part, you will write about neoliberal policies. In the body part, you will just explain what I have done right now. I have correlated consumption and how consumption results. There is a correlation between neoliberal policies, that is privatization, globalization, liberalization. The LPG policy that is there is a correlation between that and consumption. When there is a correlation between that and consumption, how that gives an opportunity for the government to tax new products and therefore increasing the elasticity of taxation. है ना? If you go back to the 1980s and the 1990s, because India was not at that time, before the 1990s, before the new economic policy was adopted, India was not an open economy. So because India was not an open economy, the products which were being sold maybe in European countries, maybe in other developed countries, those products did not reach us. So we were not consuming them. When we were not consuming them, the government was not taxing us. With the change in policies, new products, innovation, no, increase in consumption, increase in taxation. That is what you would write. Okay. Policy analysis process is limited if public policy analysis process is limited if possible outcomes and alternatives. If possible outcomes and alternatives, potential policies are neglected. Discuss. See, if we look at the policy making process, suppose this is a public policy. What is the primary input in a public policy process? The primary input in public policy process is related to data. Data is the primary input in the public policy process. Data is the primary input. Okay. Now read the question once again. What does the question say? Public policy analysis process, if is limited only to outcomes and alternatives. Only to outcomes and alternatives. Potential policies are neglected. Discuss. Now, if we take up data-based public policy, we are always going to judge public policy on the basis of what? Two things. Outcomes and alternative potential policies. Alternative and alternative. Now, when this happens, that means when we judge when we judge policies on the basis of outcomes, what happens? We generally take into consideration data related to achievements. If we are looking at alternatives, again, we are looking at data and we are looking at possible achievements. Possible achievements. What are we ignoring here? As the statement says, again come back to the statement, potential policies are neglected. Potential policies are neglected. Why are potential policies neglected? Because if we look at public policies and we don't go beyond this, we don't judge what policies could be and how there may be some intangible impacts of potential policies. Intangible impacts. Intangible impacts. If we don't judge the intangible impacts of potential policies, intangible impacts of potential policies, what happens? In that case, we are sometimes going to ignore policies which are potential policies. This is potential policies. And what is the theoretical input that you can give here? Theoretical input can be incremental approach. Incremental approach given by Lindblom. That could be because incremental approach says that there is never a new policy. There is always an old policy. Without innovation, there is only a addition to the existing policy. and that addition to the existing policy results into a new policy. So here there is what? There is only a judgment on what is the outcome of the existing policy and what is the alternative in the form of what? Incremental policy. Okay. You can also talk about strategic systems approach. Strategic systems approach, because strategic systems approach says what? Strategic systems approach related to no public policy. It talks about how we need to correlate policies into two categories. We need to see what are the new policies and what are the existing policies. When we are going to come up with new policies, we are going to see whether those policies addresses some very important issues. If that, there needs to be a rational approach that should be adopted. Otherwise, there can be an incremental approach that can be adopted. Okay, that is basically the theoretical input required here. Okay. Then, values and ethics in civil services are shaped by global practices and trends. Explain. Hmm. Values and ethics in civil services are shaped by global practices and trends. How are they shaped? By what are we talking about? We are talking about values and practices. And how these values and practices of public services or civil services, how are they shaped by global trends? Global trends and practices. Actually, we have discussed this during our LPG discussion. LPG and its consequences on public administration. We have discussed there how global practices tend to impact public administration as well. Now, what have we discussed there? See, if we are if we are talking about LPG, specifically if we discuss globalization, what does globalization do? Globalization brings about practices which are global practices. Now it becomes important even for people in public administration. Why? Previously that was not the case, but with with globalization also brings it also brings comparative analysis. What does globalization bring? Globalization brings comparative analysis, because now that is something which are which is now available to us. Previously that was not the case. So previously there was no globalization. We did not know what is going on in US, what's going on in other countries, but now we do that. So what happens is that once we know what is going on there, we have to integrate it as a part of the administrative structure of a particular country as well. So what does it do? It does bring about a comparative analysis, and that comparative analysis brings about certain changes. Like if we talk about accountability, and transparency. Now, if you look at certain instruments of accountability and transparency in India, like RTI or Citizens Charter, or for that matter, public service public service laws. Where are these laws emerging from? These are laws which are emerging from what are the global practices. RTI is a concept that we have. No, we were not the first country to adopt it. RTI was already in existence globally, and we have adopted that. Citizens Charter was something which emerged in UK. We adopted it. So the practices that are there, it depends. It very much depends upon what? It very much depends upon what is no, what is globally going on. The values change accordingly. Like if we talk about, suppose, the emergence of today, the phenomena like climate change and climate change resulting into the adoption of sustainable development goals. What has this done? This has changed practices. This has changed practices. It has also changed the values of administration. Now, we would like to adopt sustainable development. So, even when we talk about the administrative institutions that are there, those administrative institutions are also adopting practices which are globally considered to be sustainable by nature. If we talk about NPM, NPM was not something which was initiated in India, but NPM, no, NPM, it does influence Indian administration. How? Because NPM talks about public private partnership. NPM talks about neoliberalism. NPM talks about accountability. And all these things have done what? They have affected values as well as practices. If you remember, we have talked about phenomena like global accountability. Those issues which were previously not the issues of at least developing nations, now it has become issues of developing nation as well. Climate change, issues related to human rights. Now, these issues were not previously the issues of developing countries. These are issues of developed countries, but it has also migrated into values of Indian administration along with the administration of developing countries. What are we seeing here? We are seeing here that values and ethics in civil services are being shaped from global practices and trends. Okay. Economic development alone is not a sufficient component for women development and empowerment. Discuss. Again, this question, if we talk about women empowerment has different dimensions. It has an economic dimension. Along with economic dimension, it also has social dimension as well as political dimension. So, only economic steps could not be considered, cannot be considered as the only steps required. Okay. So, we have to take up certain steps which are going to result into social empowerment as well as political empowerment, like the steps taken to provide reservation, political reservation to women. If we talk about economic empowerment, so economic empowerment, if we discuss phenomena like gender budgeting, we can talk about self-help groups and how self-help groups play a very important role in economic empowerment. Then you can mention how economic empowerment that is there, economic empowerment has a spillover effect. How it has a spillover effect. And the empowerment process can start economically, resulting into social empowerment as well as political empowerment. And this is what the self-help groups has done. Self-help groups has not only resulted into economic empowerment but also social as well as political empowerment, which have been the spillover effects. You can mention that. Okay. Moving on. F.W. Riggs' Industria Interdependent Economy is a precursor for some features of postmodern public administration analysis. Okay. A technical question. there is no doubt that this question is a technical question, and if you don't understand the two terms, if you don't understand the ideas presented by Riggs truly, and if you don't understand what postmodernism is, you will not be able to address this question. Okay. So in this case, what do we have to do? We have to link these ideas. See, postmodern administration is about decentralization and networking. It is about flexibility and adaptability. It is about recognition of diversity and complexity, and it is also about questioning the ideas which were presented by classical approach, because postmodern theories, that is post Weberian theories, reject that. Okay, reject that ideas, and you will find that Riggs's concept does talk about all of this, because Riggs, if you look at Riggs has considered that when it comes to no when it comes to no when it comes to any economy, or for that matter any society, every society needs, no, it works on the basis of decentralization and networking. In fact, that is what it recommends. That is what it recommends. So Riggs anticipated the need for networks that postmodernism articulates as the key to effective administration. Actually, if you look at Riggs has given this concept of uh, salacracy. And in salacracy, that is the prismatic society's administration, it talks about networks. It talks about networks. How? It talks about a correlation between uh, your ascriptive and achievement values. How an individual even though he is a part of bureaucracy, will not disassociate itself completely from his identity, traditional identity, like which caste, class, religion, etc. that he belongs to. So there is a network that exists. This is what postmodernism is. Second, flexibility and adaptability. Riggs rejected one model or one specific theory addressing all the kinds of societies. He has come up with different societies. He has talked about agraria, he has talked about fused, prismatic, diffracted societies. So he has rejected one idea and has propagated more flexibility and adaptability. Every society has different needs, and therefore every society progresses differently. This is what Riggs has said. Recognition of diversity and complexity. Few societies are different. Prismatic societies are different. Diffracted societies are different. And no, you are accepting that there is diversity, and it is a very complex. No, societies are very complex. It cannot be just labeled into one kind of a society. Finally, it questions the rational scientific management. Riggs questions the idea, but because Riggs believes that the decision making that goes on is not on the basis of scienticism, or is not on the basis of rationality. When we take decisions, or when in this case he is talking about the salacrats, and when the salacrats takes decisions, they do take decisions based on, no, not just rational elements. There are number of things, there are number of variables that they actually refer to before they take decisions. So just an assumption that every time we are going to take rational decisions is wrong. This is what the classical theory assumes. There is a correlation that is there, but provided you can make this correlation, and it depends upon analysis. Okay, moving on. The role and responsibility of the state in development process has been overemphasized and given undue importance. Critically examined. This question is about what? This question is about the, no, you can say, the emergence of the new right philosophy or the neoliberal approach. Because the neoliberal approach, including public choice approach, including your NPM model that is there, or for that matter, the governance model that emerges, all of them have done what? They have criticized the traditional public administration. And they, including if you look at scholars like Anthony Downs, they have always criticized if the state, if the market can fail, so can the state. So market can fail in what? If the market can fail in delivering public interest, state can also fail in delivering public interest and development. So they question the role of state. And according to them, the when this assumption is being made that it is only the state which can deliver development, which was the developmental model of the 1950s, that developmental model has been criticized. Okay. And the 19 post the 1960s 70s, there is an emergence of what? The emergence of neo right philosophy, the emergence of neoliberal philosophies, the emergence of public choice approach, the emergence of NPM, the emergence of governance approach. And all of them have emphasized on what? Not just the state, they have emphasized on institutional pluralism, they have emphasized on more and greater role that is to be given to the state. Okay. So this particular question will be addressed how? In the introduction part, you have to address what is the problem with the state to deliver development, problem with state, whether you can, you can quote about what public choice approach says, you can quote about what the, and what scholars like Anthony Downs says, you can quote that. Then comes the body part. The body part of your answer should be related to what? The body part of your answers should be focused upon, it should be related to the ideas which were presented by, these NPM. You can talk about Anthony Downs, you can talk about William Niskanen, you can talk about the ideas presented by Ostrom. These ideas you can present in the body part. And in the conclusion part, you have to conclude how? You have to conclude here by writing the need for both a strong state, a strong state and a strong market for development. For development. So we cannot say one institution is more important than the other. No, we cannot conclude like that. We have to conclude both the institutions are equally important. Okay. So strong state versus market debate, that is basically this particular question is about. Affirmative action for equal opportunity is a cornerstone in the recruitment to public services. Discuss it in the global context. See, equal opportunity and affirmative action. You have to write about how the Constitution of India talks about equality of opportunities. You will have to write how the Constitution but also allows positive discrimination. You can mention here also about Western countries. Western countries, including countries like US, do follow positive, no, affirmative action, positive discrimination is followed. You can address this issue by writing why is positive discrimination required. You can here also mention the recent controversy, the 2024 controversy, where when lateral entry, there was a notification related to lateral entry which did not allow for reservation, how it was opposed, what, no, how it is important that affirmative action should take place through the process of social justice. You have to address that and accordingly write this. Okay. Objective of LPG and new public management was to limit government functions and reduce public expenditure. However, both functions and expenditure has increased. Account for the paradox. LPG wanted to do what? What is the question about? The question is where LPG wanted to bring about limitation related to government expenditure, limitation related to no the interference of the government, but what it has done is absolute in contradiction to it. It has actually increased the function and also increased public expenditure. This is the question. Okay, how will you address it? You will write about what were the consequences of LPG. LPG wanted a regulatory state. LPG, if you look at, it has resulted into multiple stakeholders. It has resulted into liberalization. It has resulted into emergence of private sector. It has resulted into emergence of private sector. Now what has that done? It has created the need for a regulatory state, so different institutions for regulation, institution for regulation. Why it has increased the expenditure and why it has increased the functions? Because something which previously was not being performed by the government, which is regulatory functions, now is being performed. But at the same time, LPG has not resulted into welfare state. The concept of welfare state has not been compromised with. So the welfare functions of the state has not decreased. Welfare functions have not decreased. So along with the welfare functions, now there is a new function which is being added, which is, which is the function of regulation. Because there is emergence of private sector, so there are multiple stakeholders that have emerged. In what? Now decision making is not, now decision making is not anymore a restricted exercise to only the bureaucracy. Now we have discussed emergence of engaged administration, engaged administration, emergence of slowed down bureaucracy, slowed down bureaucracy. This is what has happened. Now, what does that mean? Now, there is a need to do what? There is a need to come up with decision making, but also institutions that are now, there are different institutions that are now a part of this whole process. So now the government needs to what? Accommodate the interest as well as the participation of this. So there has been an increase in function. How will you, no, how will you have to, previously you were just taking decisions. Now with the LPG and emergence of stakeholders, now you have to also do what? You have to also include these stakeholders in the decision making process. That has changed. There has been the malpractices that has grown, like profit or profiteering, that has grown. So that again is something which now requires the state to also check on the, on the profiteering practices of the government. That is also something that has profiteering practices of the private sector, that has also no, that has also changed. The civil society organizations, the civil society organizations have also emerged in the governance era. So this also requires management of the civil society and additional function, which means the welfare functions are still being performed, but there are new functions that are being added. This is because of LPG. You have to write that. Okay, you have to write that. You have to see that because of LPG, there is a demand that administration has to be more efficient. So different tools have to be introduced to bring about more efficiency, like the use, tools like ICT. It has to be increased. Values such as accountability. it has now to be taken up. Clear? So you will address this question like this. The basis of comparative study of public administration has evolved from institutional approach to the comparative political economic process approach. Have all these approaches enabled the development of the theory of comparative public administration? Justify your answer. Okay? What is important? It talks about comparative study, being adopting the institutional approach, also adopting the political economic process approach. Clear? So we have to explain what these are. Then we have to explain that have these approaches that has been adopted, has these approaches resulted into development of a comprehensive theory of comparative public administration or not? Justify your answer. Now, we all know, and those who are all of you who are my students, if you remember, and the notes that I have provided you specifically talks about different phases. And in those phases, we have mentioned the phases related to institutional approach, etc., etc. There are scholars like Talcott Parson who are, who have contributed to comparative public administration part, and they have talked about the structural functional approach which should be adopted. So institutional approach is what? Institutional approach is where the initially the beginning of comparative public administration was adoption of institutional approach. In the adoption of institutional approach, only one thing that was being compared was the different political and administrative institutions that exist in one country in comparison to the other country. है ना? That was the only thing that was previously being compared, the institutional approach. What was the institutional approach? What was the comparison? Institutional approach was only about studying what the formal government structures and administrative organs, only that. Clear? However, this was not enough. This was not enough, and therefore in the next phase there was an evolution where now the approach that is being adopted is what? The politico-economic approach. Why? Because the institutional approach ignored social cultural comparison, political comparison, or economic comparison. That was ignored. Now that has been adopted. Clear? Now, what does this approach talk about? This approach talks about comparison not only of politics but economics, administration, taking into account the factors like culture, history, social structure, economic development. All of them are taken into consideration before that comparison is made. Like India cannot be compared with Britain. Why? Because our history is different, our culture is different. So no, there cannot be one specific aspect of comparison. You have to take into account different aspects. You have to include those aspects as well. Okay. Now, has that resulted into a unified theory of comparative public administration? No. Actually, comparative public administration wanted to achieve no wanted to achieve one of the objectives was theory building, but they never able to achieve a unified theory. In fact, comparative public administration has been criticized on the ground that it has a self-defeating purpose. It has a self-defeating purpose because comparative public administration, as now we know, takes into account culture, history. So they do not believe in one ecology and the same one ecology. They believe that there will be a difference in ecology. So one unified theory you can never have, and that is the reason why it did not result into one unified theory. Yes, it definitely has evolved the study of administrative structures, comparative structures. So that has happened without a development of a unified theory. We have not been in they have not been successful in doing that. Okay, that is the reason why. because see, it is not possible. If you consider that there are ecological differences, you cannot come up with one theory and say that this will apply to every country, because you yourself are addressing this idea by saying that no, it is not possible to compare because the cultures are different, the no the administrative practices, the history is different, the society is different. So if that is the case, one unified theory is not possible. Yes, multiple theories are definitely possible, but one unified theory is not possible. Okay. Can competency mapping competency mapping be linked to career development? Incentivize civil servants' commitment to effective civil service delivery. Elaborate. This actually is a question related to performance appraisal. What is this concept of competency mapping? First, let's try and understand that. What is competency mapping? When there is an attempt made to identify specific skills, knowledge, behavioral attributes required for various roles within the civil servants. So, if you are to be positioned in a particular in a particular position, before you are promoted to that very position, first what is being seen or evaluated is that what is the need for that organization, what are the what are the specific knowledge required, skills required, what are the behavioral attributes required. When that is done, when that is done, and then accordingly civil servants are chosen. Those civil servants are chosen who have that capability, and then they are positioned or they are appointed to such positions. That is what is competency mapping. Okay. And how is it related to career development? See, if we know the competency of a particular individual, we can come up with, first of all, proper assessment as well as training practices. So we know, okay, this individual is competent here. There is a problem related to competency here. So training programs can be designed accordingly. Second, it can enhance commitment and effectiveness. Why? Because it is going to boost job satisfaction and motivation. You are positioned to do something which you are very much capable of. So your achievements would be higher. Your achievements would result into better satisfaction and motivation. Thirdly, performance improvement. Why? Competency based evaluation. Competency based. Now you are not being evaluated for those aspects which are not a part of your competency. Rather, you are being evaluated for what you have done and what you are capable of doing. Okay. So that would do what? It would ensure there would be proper promotions. It would encourage higher performance standards. And finally, it would also easily be aligned to organizational goals. Understand what is required and accordingly address that through mapping the competencies, etc., etc. Okay. Actually, if the question is about rank classification and position classification without directly addressing this. In India, we take up rank classification. So we rank people, not the position. In developed countries, position classification is taken up, where first it is seen what positions and what are the requirements of, that is in terms of what are the duties that are to be performed, and accordingly there are progresses that are being made. Okay. So that is something that is there. Okay. So this is basically the question. Next, the last question is the question number 8. Question number 8A. Effectiveness of civil societies in development process is only when the state institutions are receptive to inputs from the civil society organization. Discuss. देखो, very simple question. What does the civil society, what is the responsibility of the civil society? See, the responsibility of the civil society is related to what? It is related to either acting as, no, you can say civil society does what? It plays an important role in policy making. It plays an important role in ensuring accountability and transparency. It plays a very important role in providing services, or you can say filling service gaps. Civil society also plays a role of a pressure group. These are the roles that the civil society plays in very general sense. But how can that be effective? Only if the input provided by the civil society is adhered to by the government. So if the policies are to be framed, civil society organizations have evaluated and provided feedback. If the government does not take into account the feedback, if the government does not address the feedback, there will be no effectiveness of the institution. Similarly, accountability and transparency. Civil society organizations use methods like the RTI to get information and thereby hold the people in power accountable. But if these things are not addressed, if the input is not addressed from, by the government, there is no accountability. Similarly, they are also there to provide services, specifically fulfill service gaps. So in this case, they are doing what the government is supposed to do, but if they are not assisted by the government in the terms of funding, etc., then again they will not be effective. Similarly, if they also act as a pressure group, sometimes they mobilize people and they do these things. But again, if they are not appropriately addressed, there will be no effectiveness. Okay. So the effectiveness of this body depends upon whether the government or the state institutions that are there, they are willing to accept the input or not. Okay. Next, evaluate the role and scope of tact knowledge and personal experience as an important source of knowledge in policy making process. Okay. See, policy making cannot be done on the basis of just data. It cannot be done just on the basis of data. Okay. Because when, not sometimes data does not give us the true picture, and that is where experience matters, that is where the ground knowledge matters. What does a civil servant bring along with him? Civil servant brings along with him contextual understanding the context in which the policy is to be implemented. Secondly, it also fills in gaps. Whatever formal data, sometimes formal data does not capture some very important variables. People with experience, people with knowledge can fill in those gaps. Thirdly, they can improve feasibility and implementation. They know because of their ground experience what is feasible, what can be implemented, and what is just ideal and cannot be implemented. And fourthly, they can also provide innovative solutions. Okay, this is what the role is. Okay, that is what you have to write here. Finally, the efficacy of management aid tool depends upon the purpose and appropriateness of tools and techniques explained with examples. This is a question related to improvement of tools and techniques for administrative improvement, and it's a very factual question. There is nothing much to understand here. See, when we talk about the tools, not every tool can be used everywhere. Like when it comes to PERT or other forms of network analysis, it can be used for big infrastructure projects, big projects. PERT can be used for innovative projects. Similarly, so, no SWOT analysis, depending upon what the tool is, depending upon where it is being used. Similarly, appropriateness of the environment, like management by objective. If we are talking about, it will work very well when it comes to professional goal oriented organization where there is a participatory culture, but it will not work very well when it comes to bureaucratic organizations, because in bureaucratic organizations there are lack of professionalism and there is a lack of participation, so it will not work well there. Similarly, total quality management, it if you, even if you don't write this because it's not mentioned in your syllabus, it would work. Okay, it would work. Space exploration. Space exploration means, when, see, PERT is a technique which is used for innovate whenever there is a no innovation required, any task which has never been done before. Like if we talk about, suppose, certain institutions like the DRDO or ISRO, they undertake activities which have not been taken up before. Okay, like if we talk about Mangalyaan, Chandrayaan, or something like this, these things are, these are non-repetitive things, and that is where PERT is applicable. Building of big infrastructure projects, CPM, critical path method, is applicable. That means you cannot use these tools and apply it everywhere. You have to use these tools and there are very specific places where you can apply them. Okay. Similarly, when it comes to adaptability and simplicity, decisional support system like data, skills, etc. And finally, if you talk about examples, balance scorecard, cost benefit analysis, etc. Okay, so this is a very technical question. If you have studied PERT, CPM, MIS, no, management by objective, these 4 5 techniques, if you know, you can answer them. Okay, this is basically the discussion that was required. You can see the questions that are there, they are sometimes a bit tricky. Like this time there were a lot of questions that did not have straightforward answers. You had to correlate that. This is one skill that you require in public administration. Whenever you are writing, now whenever you're choosing this optional, you have to have that kind of conceptual clarity so that you can address such kind of requirements. Okay, that is it for today. No, we will be soon joining with the second session in which I will be talking about paper 2. So what was the paper 2 part, and no, what were the questions asked there in details. We will be discussing what were the specific answers to each and every question. Okay, that is it. Thank you everyone. Thank you. We'll meet in the next session. Thank you.